So let's talk about the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, which on Friday released its full year 2020 financials showing internally generated revenue hits 3.06 billion naira from a much lower 296 million way back in 2016 when Yewande Sadiku, the executive secretary, came on board. Now, counting down to the final weeks of our 5-year tenure as the head of the NIPC, Yewande Sadiku joins me in the studio tonight for a look back and future forward exclusive interview. A good evening to you, ma. Welcome to the show.
Good evening, Bosun. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. Let's start with your 5-year financial, the 5-year financial summary of the NIPC under your tenure, 2016 to 2020.
Thank you, Bosun. So in 2016, the year I joined NIPC, I joined the agency in November. In that year, the IGR that was generated was 296 million. The following year, we generated only 29 million. That's because the bulk of NIPC's revenue actually comes from Pioneer Status Incentive. Over the years that I've been in NIPC, it's accounted for about 98–99% of NIPC's IGR. In 2018, we had a bumper year. There had been an administrative suspension on the Pioneer Status Incentive process because there were concerns about transparency and the way that the process was being managed. That administrative suspension was lifted in August 2017, which accounted for the bumper year that we had in 2018. So in 2018, we had IGR of 5.59 billion, unusual in many respects. In 2019, we had a more normal year, 1.6 billion, and then in 2020, 3 billion. So from 2016 to 2020, the IGR went from 296 million to 3 billion.
So, Yewande, I'm looking at this 5-year period and very interesting when you look at the financials. But the 2020 looks very interesting to me, if you ask me. What are the facts and the figures for last year? Of course, that was a pandemic year, by the way.
Yes. So 2020 started off incredibly slowly. In the first 4 months of 2020, we generated less than 20 million naira in IGR. We saw a big pickup, when work returned. In July, August is where the bulk of that came in. IGR for NIPC has always been what we call somewhat lumpy. It's not smooth throughout the year. It comes in bits and bobs. So we closed the year at 3 billion. As with other government agencies that are listed on the schedule to the Fiscal Responsibility Act, we have a responsibility to remit 80% of our operating surplus to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. Operating surplus is what is left over after you expend your approved budget from your actual IGR. So in the year, we spent about 650 million on running NIPC from the IGR, which left us with a generous operating surplus, from which we then had a remittance to the CRF. So the CRF remittance that we had in 2020 was 1.9 billion. Now, over the 5 years that I've been in NIPC, the total IGR that we've generated in that period, if I add the first half of 2021, which has also been interesting, the total IGR generated has been 11.9 billion. Of that, we've remitted 5.8 billion to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. So roughly about 49% of what we've generated in the 5-year period has been remitted to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. You were speaking earlier about NNPC. I mean, when you speak about agencies like NNPC and Customs, the numbers that I talk about over a 5.5-year period are really, small pickings relatively. But if you look in the context of the proportion that is remitted to the CRF, I think NIPC has stood up for itself and, carried its own weight in many ways.
Okay, so sticking with the financials in terms of what you I also look at the reserves. I'm looking at about 1.2 billion naira here. When you list revenue-generating agencies, NIPC is not going to be among the top 10 by any stretch of anyone's imagination. I'm not sure even if it's going to be among the top 12. So you're not a frontline revenue-generating agency. But again, how do you get reserves?
So NIPC, in my view, should actually not be regarded as a revenue-generating agency, period. The business of investment promotion is typically a public good. It is not revenue-generating. But we process pioneer status incentive applications. I consider it to be somewhat of a moral hazard because the implication of pioneer status is that beneficiaries then enjoy a tax holiday of 3 to 5 years. It is good for them to enjoy that. I mean, and we approve all applications properly following the process. Nevertheless, even though we rely on it for the bulk of our income, we go through the process properly. Now, because this pioneer status means that we earn a fee, the responsible thing when we earn that fee is to properly account for it, even though we're not normally revenue generating. But to the extent that we generate more revenue than we need to run NIPC's day-to-day operations, the responsible thing is to remit what is due to government. The reserves are very useful. As I mentioned at the beginning, NIPC's IGR is very patchy. So there are periods, as happened in 2017, when the IGR generation was very poor. It is for periods like that that the reserves will be useful in allowing the agency continue to run.
Very, very interesting. When we return, you will take us through NIPC's operations and key milestones and a whole lot more. Stand by, Yewande Sadiko in Abuja studios. Stand by, everyone, also here in Lagos, and our viewers around the world. We'll be right back into. Yeah, welcome to the second and final part of my conversation with Yewande Sadiko, Executive Secretary at the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission. Thank you very much, Ms. Sadiko. Now, let's talk about the structure or template of operations that NIPC had when you took over in 2016.
So the first thing is that NIPC generally had a culture of what I would call reactive investment promotion. And I think the way the world has evolved, the way competition for capital is intense, you can only really win at this game of investment promotion if you are proactive and if you operate on a targeted basis. So we spent a lot of time, building the capacity for targeted investment promotion. In my own view, the easiest way to do this is to work with consultants, but I did not think that the capacity of the organization would be improved in that manner. So painful as it was, I actually went through, over the last 5 years, building internal capacity with the staff, to learn to do proactive investment promotion. What we've done in many ways is to put the building blocks in place. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. So for those who will come after me, there's still plenty of work that needs to be done. But at least the foundation is in place. Pioneer status, which, as I mentioned, accounts for the bulk of NIPC's IGR, was shrouded in. It wasn't so much shrouded in secrecy, but there was little disclosure to the public about the process, about the beneficiaries and the like. Since the third quarter of 2017, we've published a report on a quarterly basis, and it's, anybody is free to download it from NIPC's website, that shows all of those who applied for pioneer status, those that we gave it to, those who are still enjoying it, and some highlights of the information that they gave us. So from that period, you can tell how many people have benefited from pioneer status. That's what we put in public. On the government side, we've actually given an estimate of the cost of pioneer status incentive so that it can guide the reform of the process and help us to measure whether it's actually achieving its objectives. As with all government agencies, you will always work with limited resources. So we also thought it was important to define where NIPC should focus its energies. In the context of investments generally, we defined the ethos that should drive Nigeria's investment search. And what we define it as RIBS, responsible, inclusive, balanced, and sustainable, generally defines the kind of investments that we would like to attract. So the first thing we did in that regard was to look at the quality of the bilateral investment treaties that Nigeria has signed over the years, apart from reforming the template that we then use to negotiate investment agreements going forward. And that review gave us a startling picture. Something like 80% of the bilateral investment treaties that we signed in the past need to be renegotiated, need to be modernized to ensure that they can achieve for us the kind of investments that we want, investments that move us towards our sustainable development goals. I thought it was important as an investment promotion agency, one, and two, as a public agency, to properly account to the public for what we're doing. So in the context of the Freedom of Information Act, which places an obligation on all government agencies to make a certain level of disclosure, NIPC's operational, financial, procurement, legal, staff, and the like information we put out on a quarterly basis. And then we publish, as you know, a report of investment announcements, where based on NIPC's newsletter that we publish 6 days a week, every day but Sunday, we then, on a quarterly basis, report on investment announcements that have been made. They're not actual investments, because information on actual investments comes from NBS, but they give us directionally a sense of investor interest in Nigeria, because you start by making an announcement before you actually implement. The objective of tracking the announcements was to give us the capacity to work with those who are making the announcements, to track them and to help facilitate, resolve, and the like, the challenges that they face. We're in the middle currently of developing an e-government platform that we call the Single Window Investors Platform. The objective of which is to take the wealth of material that we have now generated over the last 5 years, put it on that platform so that it is easier to access, but more importantly, make the work of NIPC more accessible through an electronic platform that makes what we do now, manual report generation, much, much easier, but also makes it easier for applicants who want NIPC services to apply for it electronically, to follow the status of their applications, in particular the Pioneer Status Incentive. We don't have enough time in the day for me to talk about what we've been doing for the last 5 years.
I know, but the interesting thing about the promotion in investment promotion agencies is what you call a deal room for investors. Would you like to see this in NIPC? And do you think it will help or enhance the ease of doing business in Nigeria for investors looking in from the outside?
So in the context of targeted investment promotion, there's some foundations you need. The first thing that we put in place is what we call the Book of States, which gives you, for states, the 36 states on a state-by-state basis, competitive advantages and the investment opportunity that they're trying to promote. Ideally, that should be followed by a dedicated and deliberate profiling on a state-by-state basis of investment opportunities, so that investment opportunities across the states they get the right level of visibility for investor attraction. That can then form the foundation for a deal room, where on a sector basis, investment impact on a geographical basis, for instance, we can give investors a sense of the opportunities that exist across Nigeria. Only an investment promotion agency that has a reach across the country, because we work with our partners at state level, can really do that level of granular work. But properly speaking, for deal generation, you need investment bankers, because the quality of expertise, the quality of the tools, the quality of the materials, and with all due respect, the intellectual capital that is required to fully unlock that potential generally doesn't exist in the public sector the way it has depth in the private sector, although the information that is required for that translation exists in the public sector without a doubt.
Yeah, you spoke earlier about the fact that whoever is taking over after your 5-year tenure ends in the next couple of weeks will have a whole lot of work to do. So what's the future of the NIPC? What's on in the box for your successor?
I think there's a growing awareness of compliance, of transparency. It's not something that an organization embeds overnight, but certainly the fabric, the structure, the foundation of the institution is much, much stronger than when I joined. A lot of the building blocks for targeted, proactive investment promotion have been laid, but that work needs to be built on. Working with the states, the investments will always sit in the states. However large a federal agency may be, if you don't recognize the value of state-level investment promotion, Nigeria cannot win at this game. So all that work still needs to be translated. Then we went through the process of defining the strategic countries for investment promotion, countries that we must work better with to unlock investment prospects in their jurisdictions. That work also needs to be built on. But a lot of the foundation, that has been built that is required has been built. The example, if I can, the example I'd like to give, if you're trying to build a skyscraper, you cannot build it overnight. You spend a lot of time building a foundation in the ground that you cannot see at the ground level, but that is required for that foundation, that skyscraper to be built whenever it is built. From what I have seen from my 5 years in the public sector, the wealth of what Nigeria has in terms of investor interest is exactly like a skyscraper, but we need a foundation to be able to carry it in future.
Thank you very much. Great having you on the show tonight. And we wish you all the best as you round off your first term at the NIPC. Yewande Sadiku, Executive Secretary, Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission.